So welcome everyone. I'm Martin Smith, and here with Stephen and Lynn. We're quite excited to be here today and share with you some of our thinking around scientific literacy and how do we define that, and really focus our programming in 4-H around what we're calling have called our 4 anchor points of scientific literacy. And this work goes back quite a ways because we were tripping over the idea of, well, what is scientific literacy? We hear about non-formal programs like 4-H that can help advance scientific literacy, but the question always, to us was, well, what does scientific literacy mean? And so we're going to present to you our research on this and how we frame this around 4 anchor points situated in this out-of-school time context of 4-H. And those 4 anchor points you'll see here in a little bit are science content, scientific reasoning skills, interests and attitudes, and then contributions through applied participation. So, and then toward the end here, we're going to give you examples, 3 examples of how we have done some programming here in California that's framed around those 4 anchor points. So anyway, as far as background goes relative to scientific literacy, we know that it's an important educational societal goal, and this goes back all the way to the 1990s when AAAS came out with publications, and the literature is really, I don't want to say littered with, but it's you'll find this, for the next 2 to 3 decades about this need for scientific literacy. And well, what does that mean? And it means that we're really trying to develop socially responsible and competent individuals that really can participate in this complex society in which we live that really is shaped by science and technology. But when we look at test scores with youth, we find that those scores are pretty low overall, and both nationally and internationally, and that if youth lack that foundational science competency, they're really unable to pursue careers in science, and they're unable to really participate fully in society, whether they're trying to address societal challenges like climate change, really understanding climate change, doing some sort of action toward improving climate change, informing public policy, for example, around energy resources, making food choices. Do I want GMO or non-GMO food? So what does that mean? So really we're trying to help young people become engaged in society and really able to think like a scientist such that they can make informed choices. So the challenge with scientific literacy is there really is no agreement as to what this means. And one of the authors that we cited and really based some of our research around, Robert, said there's this veritable deluge of definitions out there. So there is no consensus on what does scientific literacy mean. And most of the definitions are really pretty cumbersome, and they focus mainly on science content and processes, and the viewpoint that it's really from a scientific viewpoint, the viewpoint of a scientist looking at what does scientific literacy mean, as opposed to the approach we took, which is really a citizen-based approach, and we'll get to that in a minute. But and so when we try to look at this definition, and defining scientific literacy is important, because when you look at 4-H, if we want to compare programs, we want to compare science learning across programs, and we have such different science programs in 4-H. So we have animal science, and within animal science, we have several different types of projects. We have computer science, we have robotics, other engineering types of projects. So how do we make comparisons across programs, and how do we evaluate the pedagogical strategies are being used, and perform these outcome evaluations. So all that is important. So we do need a definition that is clear and allows us to make these, to do evaluation and make these comparisons. But then, as DeBoer said, any definition of scientific literacy really does have to be conceptualized broadly enough to pursue the goals that are most suitable for a given situation. And that really is sort of where we began to hone in, because science learning, and science learning particularly within 4-H, is highly, highly contextualized. So Stephen, go ahead. Let's go to the next couple of slides to go to the Vision 1 and Vision 2. So as I said, historically, most of the definitions, and we found quite a few of them looking through the literature, most definitions of scientific literacy are based on or focused on generalized scientific knowledge related to major science disciplines. So that's referred to as within science. So it's a Vision 1 approach, and that's that within science. What's important to scientists versus what's important to the individual. That's the Vision 2. So science that's focused on science-related situations that we as individuals may encounter in our everyday lives. So that's this contextualized idea of what being scientifically literate is. And when we take that Vision 2 approach, we're really going more from an asset-based approach. So when we evaluate using the Vision 1, we're looking at what people don't know. And so it's what you don't know that defines whether you're scientifically literate or not. But when we focus on Vision 2, what people are interested in and what they come in contact with in their everyday lives, it's more of an asset-based approach. So our definition really is it's a combination, but it really comes at this from this asset-based Vision 2 approach. So let's go to the next slide. And so when we look at informal science context, so like I said, science learning is highly contextualized, and non-formal education programs like 4-H have become more and more important in learning of science. And Stephen, what's the title? Is it the 98% solution? Is that what it is, or 96%? I always forget the
95%.
95% solution, thank you. And that really 95% of the science learning that takes place is outside of school. And so these programs like 4-H and other out-of-school time programs are really have become, well, have come into focus much more as a way to address this need to improve scientific literacy. So when you look at these non-formal, or sometimes called informal science contexts, individuals self-select activities. So you think of 4-H. It really is learner-driven. They decide what their interest is, what their passion is, and what kind of project or program they want to join and become engaged in. And these programs really are linked to societal priorities and issues. Those may be local, those may be more national, state, even global. Think of the Million Trees Project. And again, we're taking an asset-based approach, and we are contextualizing that scientific learning. So really that is where our definition comes from. Our anchor points definition is we're looking at this Vision 2 approach that is asset-based and within contextualized learning settings where science learning is taking place in 4-H. We have one more slide there before I hand this off. So again, Vision 2 and Vision 1. So we're taking this Vision 2 asset-based approach, and we've defined this around 4 anchor points. But you'll see that we do have Vision 1 elements in there. One of our anchor points is content, but it's content that is contextualized, not general science knowledge, but contextualized for the learner's interest. And then we also do have an anchor point on science process skills or critical thinking skills. So it is a bit of a combination between those two, but really we are coming at this from a Vision 2 asset-based approach and allowing us then to compare across programs. Okay, Stephen, I think you're up.
Great, thank you. So part of our project was looking at all of the definitions of scientific literacy that are rattling around in the literature. So we conducted an analytical literature review, identified existing definitions from a number of different works, seminal works, national reports. We synthesized key themes, looked at commonalities and variations, and then within our team, used a consensus-based process to develop our framework of scientific literacy for the 4-H sort of context. And we won't delve into the methods. You can read more about that if you're interested. So let's go through the 4 anchor points. And I should say that the anchor points, we use the term anchor points because both conceptually and metaphorically, these anchor points provide guideposts that are flexible enough to adapt to local needs and situations. So as you'll see when we showcase our 3 program examples, we include and make sure all 4 are included, but the content will differ, the scientific reasoning, the emphasis on scientific reasoning will differ, contribution will differ, but all 4 are present. So the first is science content, and this is emphasis on science-related content encountered by individuals in specific informal learning setting contexts, in contrast with viewing content as generalized body of knowledge. So definitely focused more on what young people are going to encounter in their everyday lives. In addition, if you think about relating our definition of science literacy back to for example, the next generation science standards, the disciplinary core ideas and the cross-cutting concepts from NGSS would probably fit more in the science content than any of the other 4 anchor points. So science content is important, but that has to be sort of taught and learned and experienced within the other anchor points as well. So the second one is scientific reasoning skills. These are the practices of science. So if you can think about the next generation science standards, this could be the practices of science and engineering. That could be one framework that you'd use to sort of focus on scientific reasoning skills, although there are other frameworks as well that people could use. The third anchor point are interests and attitudes, or the affective domain. We want to stimulate an interest in science, positive attitudes towards science, and help young people begin to identify as someone who can do science, someone who can contribute to science, someone who uses science. And this also includes enhancing motivation to become involved in science. And the fourth anchor point is contribution through applied participation. This is a very sort of experiential education approach, right? It's not just about learning and reflecting, but also about applying knowledge in new situations. So this anchor point is about engaging young people in science by offering authentic community-based opportunities for them to use what they've learned in issues of socio-scientific importance in other ways in their communities. This also helps support youth in identifying with the larger scientific community. So there's the brief rundown on the 4 anchor points, and I think they'll come alive a little bit more when we give the examples in how they're manifested in our 3 programs. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Lynn.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Martin. So some thinking about, go ahead and advance the slide, Stephen. So in summary, what we're really talking about here is that a recognition that defining scientific literacy is really essential for program development and evaluation. And by looking at that Vision 2 approach, it really creates opportunities for that systematic advancement of organizational efforts through that asset-based approach, which we thought was so important because everyone has something to bring to the table. We're all making contributions, and we wanted everyone to think about what they have in their skill sets that makes them scientifically literate. And then also that strategy, or this strategy, emphasizes the relevant science, curiosity, and knowledge of individuals to learn through different reasons, including interest, need, and curiosity. Next slide. This has a lot of implications for our program, specifically around curriculum development and adaptation, which can then be driven by content associated with specific situations important to clientele and geographic regions, which is emphasized in area or anchor point number 1. You know, the way we do science in California is going to be different from West Virginia, it's going to be different from Indiana, so that situated learning is critical. Also, the utilization of that Vision 2 approach to defining scientific literacy provides an opportunity to design educator professional development opportunities that really incorporate specific features considered to be critical to advancing knowledge and skills of science educators, with an emphasis on that science content knowledge, as well as then linking professional development opportunities to larger organizational goals. So again, that asset-based approach. And then finally, the 4 anchor points really provide a framework for consistent, measurable learning objectives and goals that can be used for evaluation. As such, that summative evaluation can target the 4 anchor points through the use of appropriate evaluation methods, and also around content understanding and contributions made by learners through applied participation, which is really, in my opinion, where 4-H really has the edge, if you will, over other youth organizations. We take that learning cycle full scale and really do the application. And the 4 anchor points really help to support that. Okay, Stephen, go ahead.
So this is Martin. I'll just jump in here since I'm up first with these 3 examples, but I wanted to give people an opportunity here to ask any questions before we go into the examples. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask us? I see everyone's mic is on mute except mine, so maybe not. All right, well, let's go ahead and move into these 3 examples and try to, we'll point out how these 4 anchor points manifested themselves in these examples. So the first one is a project that is still going on. This goes back about 3 or 4 years now, that we did a program with some youth in 2 counties north of us here at Davis, Sutter and Yuba counties. And these youth were involved in a biosecurity education program. So go ahead and advance to the next slide, Stephen. And the youth participants in this project are, so when you look at 4-H animal science, let me kind of back up here. This is really one of the, actually I think it is the largest project nationally. California, I think we have 30,000 youth who raise livestock and poultry annually. And we know from epidemiological literature that backyard farms are sources of vectors and pathogens that can cause disease to animals, so animal-animal transmission, and they can cause zoonotic illnesses or receive an illness from a human. So there's this human-animal connection. And that then when you take animals to the fair exhibitions, that there are a lot of risks for pathogen transmission. Standing water, dirty pens, people moving from barn to barn, and sort of carrying pathogens with them unbeknownst to them on the soles of their shoes, contaminated barn tools, not many hand washing stations in some cases, wash racks are a serious issue. So this idea of having biosecurity education for 4-H animal science projects really is important. And so these youth, so let's go to the next slide. There were, I don't know, 20-some youth involved in total in these two counties. I want to say 26, but I'd have to go back and check the literature. And they were involved in a biosecurity education curriculum project using 5 sequenced modules where they learned, and again, if you think about the 4 anchor points here, we focus on content knowledge around disease transmission, risk assessment, risk mitigation. They developed critical thinking skills. They had to go out and do these risk assessments and make comparisons and come up with strategies to mitigate against risks. They developed an interest and attitude around this because these were their animals, and their animals that they were going to show, and they invested all this time and money and effort into raising them, and they wanted to have healthy animals that they took to the fair, and they wanted to keep them healthy at the fair. And then the community engagement. They did education outreach to the community through a service learning project. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll share some of what those outcomes were. So they really, we did outcome evaluation on their content learning and their skills, so critical thinking skills, science process skills, and we saw improvements there in both of those, statistically significant improvements. And then they became these community science experts because now they're interested in this topic. And so community science experts, where they take their knowledge and their skills, and they were working to inform their community. They went to the fair board. They actually did a risk assessment of their local fair, and they saw that there weren't enough hand washing stations. They weren't strategically located. There was another one where they were they had a champions barn where all the champions went to the same barn, and they saw that as a risk where you had different species commingling in the same barn, and that now no longer exists. And they brought about other changes too, where they're steam washing pens before and after the fair. They're cleaning pens down to the dirt layer as opposed to just tossing new straw on top. So they've brought about these excellent changes. And they did this through presentations to the fair board, the youth themselves. And then they also were involved in the development of 3 educational videos about a year later, because they were, and this project continues. They're still out there doing their work. And they posted these videos on their Facebook page. And I got a call the next day from the program representative, the staff person there running the 4-H program, the program part of it, and she said, "You're not going to believe this, Martin, but we had over 20,000 hits on that page and 500 downloads in 24 hours." So it's pretty amazing what these youth have done, and we actually have an article coming out pretty soon in the journal that will highlight this project. So if you think of those 4 anchor points, the content was learned, the skills were developed, their interest and attitude continues because, like I said, they continue to do outreach, and it's been sustained over time. And they did this community engagement, so they really have become, as we call them, community science experts. All right, Stephen, I think you're next. Is that right?
Yes, all right. Well, thank you, Martin. So the second example is from natural resources, water conservation. Many of you may be familiar with the curriculum, There's No New Water, from Shop 4-H. It's a curriculum that focuses on water conservation and quality, designed for middle and high school youth. It has 6 modules, and the main concepts in the curriculum are around the natural water cycle, urban-rural interface, mapping watersheds, and then a couple of modules on implementing a service learning project. So this is a curriculum available through 4-H, and I wanted to showcase how the 4 anchor points sort of show up in this curriculum, both in a lesson and in the entire curriculum. So when you delve into a lesson, I picked out one lesson, from storm clouds to the ocean, chance encounters of watering water. This is an activity where the young people act as a raindrop, and they either fall in a field or an urban area, and then they sort of follow the path of that raindrop. And within that lesson, the 4 anchor points can be seen. There's concepts and vocabulary in that module that young people are hopefully understanding through their experiential education activity. The activity helps them reason scientifically by asking questions, constructing explanations, a little bit of engaging in argument from evidence during that sort of reflection, the sharing, processing, generalizing period. The simulation style activity helps promote excitement, so young people sort of enjoy doing the activity, and then looking at the resulting water at the end. And then the lesson has application suggestions. For example, identify potential pollutants in your community, propose strategies to decrease. So we see all 4 anchor points evident in each lesson. And then when you look at the curriculum overall, there's the concepts and vocabulary that we're hoping young people get by participating in all 6 modules around human impacts on water quality and quantity is the overarching concept or the big idea. In each module, they're engaging in different science and engineering practices from NGSS, so reaching that scientific reasoning. The experiential activities promote interest, and many activities ask youth to think about or apply concepts to their own lives, which helps increase the relevance and sort of meaningfulness of the activities, which also then can enhance motivation. And then when you look at the curriculum overall, the first couple of modules 1 through 4, are about more emphasis on their own learning. And then modules 5 and 6 have youth contribute. Module 5 has them do a service learning project, and module 6 gets the middle schoolers and high schools to then lead and facilitate activities to younger children. So they're also applying what they've learned by helping to engage younger children in some of these concepts. So we can see the anchor points evident in the overall curriculum too. And then when we were to go about and evaluate learner outcomes of the curriculum, different ways that we could evaluate content would be in a survey, asking youth about concepts, both pre and post. We could have them do a reflective essay. If we wanted to evaluate their scientific reasoning skills and how it was impacted by the curriculum, we could do science process skills inventory or survey. Perhaps we could have them engage in a town hall style debate. You could really see their sort of science reasoning happening there. Interest, there's a lot of surveys available to assess interest and attitudes and motivations around science learning. And then looking to assess their contribution, young people could report on their service learning project that they did and use the results of their service learning project to really assess their contribution through applied participation. We can really see the anchor points evident at sort of like the lesson level, at the curriculum level, and then in the evaluation that we can do of the entire curriculum experience. I'll turn it over to Lynn.
Thank you, Stephen. So my talk is going to be around what I'm doing with the National Mentoring Program, and in particular through this Tech Wizards. And my focus is really going to be about the incorporation of technology. For those of you who aren't familiar with the National Mentoring Program, it comes from National 4-H Council. There are several different models that you can follow. And I think what's important to recognize here is the Tech Wizards is really a program model, not necessarily a curriculum. So if you chose to do Tech Wizards, the idea is that you would follow the model of the science opportunities to engage in your community, but you still need to find a curriculum to overlay that for the content. So locally, we've really been doing it around gardening and taking an opportunity to take a really deep exploration about where science or where food comes from and how food is grown. It's kind of counterintuitive living where we live right here. I'm in the Salinas Valley, which is where all of your bagged lettuce comes from. So agriculture is everywhere. It's a huge economic driver where we're at, but yet young people don't really understand. And a lot of that is we have a lot of migrant farmers. We have a lot of families from Mexico who look at farming as being this very laborious, back-breaking work and don't really understand the science behind it. So through this program, we've used a variety of curriculum where young people really get to explore and learn about agriculture and nutrition through these intensive interactive gardening lessons, where every week they meet with a mentor and they use the garden as the educational tool for learning about one another, so that relationship building, but also then learning about science and science processes. Also through this process then, the young people are developing their scientific reasoning skills through that problem-solving approach in the garden, right? So what's gonna prevent your vegetables and fruits from growing to their fullest capacity? Is it insects? Is it lack of water? Is it poor soil? What are the investigative techniques that young people are starting to use and develop as a result of using the garden as their laboratory? So they're able to make decisions about types of varieties of tomatoes and peppers, and if they need to be in a shady location or a sunny location. So through journals and opportunities to use the garden as a laboratory every week over time, they're starting to develop this keener sense of understanding of what it means to be a scientist, and then also how to think more like a scientist in order to make good decisions. So next slide. The other thing that I've learned as a result of this project, which was actually very surprising to me, is this development of interest and attitudes around science. And what I have learned is that this program has created an opportunity for young people to challenge their assumptions about who does science and what science is. I recently was on a sabbatical leave taking a look at some of the data from this program, and I was surprised to see that the gains around science, interest, and attitudes and skills weren't as high as I had hoped they'd be. So I went and had some focus groups with some of the young folks, and they really talked about how their idea of what a scientist is pretty traditional. You know, it's a guy that blows up things and works in a lab coat. So trying to get them to see science as the garden and in the nutrition components and in all the activities that we've been doing has kind of been an aha moment, not only for me, but for the young people as well. Having an opportunity to explore science in a different way than what they normally do in a classroom. So here's this opportunity where it's informal, they're working with teens as mentors, it's an opportunity to develop relationships, but it's using science as the vehicle to do that. And then lastly, the contribution that they're making, I think, is pretty exciting. I'm working with our entomologists in one of our counties, and we've developed a Qualtrics survey app. So the young people every week go out and do insect data. They collect species numbers and types, and they upload all that information in support of the University of California, Davis IPM, the Integrated Pest Management Program. So what this does for them is it helps them understand the value and the importance of their program by actually supporting research at the university level. Then after every 6 weeks, the scientist or our entomologist zooms into the site and does a data sharing party with them. So he brings up the graphs and the information regarding what we're finding, why we're finding things the way we are, taking a look at highs and lows and what was going on that week in regards to weather. So young people are not just having this experience, but they're making a contribution back to the university. But more importantly, is they're having these experiences that help to contribute to their interests and attitudes and develop their skills and competencies in a really real manner, because they're actually living as scientists while they're participating in this program. So it's been very exciting. I'm done. Thanks.
All right. Well, for more resources, we've shared that before, and then here's the reference for the paper that goes into more detail. But at this point, we'll open it up for questions or comments or observations.
So this is Jen. So is this the paper, the link that you're showing right here, the one that Martin mentioned, or is there an upcoming paper? Oh, I think maybe he was speaking specifically to the kids with their farm animals, perhaps on that one, on an upcoming paper.
Right, the
Right, that's an upcoming paper.
Okay.
But this is the actual anchor points paper.
Okay. And the upcoming paper, I'm just curious, are you allowed to tell us what journal that's going to be in?
It's going to be in California Agriculture.
Awesome. Okay, that sounded like.
Yeah, it's a special issue. I'm not certain when it's coming out. All the articles are under peer review right now, so I'm hoping it's out in 2019.
Great. No, that sounded like a really interesting project. So we'll look forward to that.
So other questions or comments?
Thanks for your presentation today. I was intrigued by how you talked about how the model informed the evaluation, or how they aligned. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more about the intentionality there. Did you have to change what you were doing to evaluate the project to align with the model, or how did it shape how you were looking at impact?
I think we probably each have maybe a slightly different answer for you, but I think what the anchor points gave us was a framework around which we could evaluate. So in sometimes some projects they may just evaluate content. Others they may do content and process skills. In the examples we gave you, we were able to look at all of those. And so the way I define it is I look at outcomes around content-based outcomes, scientific literacy outcomes, and interest and attitude outcomes. And then where the rubber meets the road, as Lynn was saying earlier, that the experiential learning cycle, the impact then is where they take that content knowledge and those skills and they apply it in that real world setting. So it gives us a framework to really see, are the outcomes, are learning objectives being achieved? And then is there a community-based impact through some type of service learning or outreach to the community in one way or another? So Lynn, I see you nodding your head a little bit, but do you have other things to add to that?
Yeah, only that, kind of using it as also using the anchor points as a opportunity to collect formative data as well, to ensure that as you're moving through the program, the curriculum, the event, whatever it might be, that you're being intentional about the direction that you're going, and that you're not missing those opportunities, and that it's not just all content based, or that it's not just all random activities that really don't have any foundation. So I think it helps to clarify the direction, and also helps to ensure that at the end you're going to get to where you want to go.
Thank you.
Stephen, did you have other things to add with that? It's a good question. I appreciate it.
No, I think you two responded quite well.
And I'll say, it's given me a lot of what I do in my work is curriculum development focused on meeting needs, and this intentionality, and Stephen and I were the main authors of the No New Water curriculum 8 or 9 years ago, and we were really intentional about putting that sort of what at that point we hadn't defined it as anchor point 4, but what today is anchor point 4, the extension to some kind of a community impact. And I'm being much more intentional in my curriculum development work to have that component. We just finished a curriculum, and we're writing it up for publication now, to the outcome assessment on predator livestock interactions and the community outreach work that the youth did around that. So it really does give them that opportunity to have their voices heard in the community. And as Lynn said, again, it completes the experiential learning cycle, because without application, the learning cycle is incomplete. And Roger Bybee, in one of his earlier articles, talked about the application is where the rubber meets the road in science. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. Other questions or comments?
I have another question related to, it sounds like you guys were very intentional in this design, and it's really interesting. Have you done any outreach with your staff and or volunteers to kind of bring these 4 anchor points to them? And what does that look like when you have those conversations, if you have?
We've had some outreach with them, and that's really ongoing, where when we are doing professional development, that we make this again an important part of that. But what was interesting is the first time we rolled this out, a colleague of ours from the Bay Area raised his hand, and he said, I don't think this just describes 4-H science. I think this describes 4-H. And we all took that as quite a compliment, because it is true. I mean, that's what we're really trying to do in 4-H, right? Is grow these youth that can make these contributions. And so I think they do recognize it. Stephen, Lynn, what are your thoughts on that?
This is Stephen. I'll just say, I think when working with volunteers and teens as teachers, that probably don't refer to it as anchor points, but I think because it shows so many similarities with the experiential learning model, that's more of the language that I sort of talk about it in. But it does help me sort of ensure that we're focusing not just on content development, but it's also about reasoning and interesting attitudes, and then that applied piece as well. So certainly it helps inform professional development and ensure that we're getting our volunteers to think beyond just sort of content learning. And with that, I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to depart for another meeting, but thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Lynn and Martin.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. So if there are more questions, I still have a few minutes, so we can field any more that people have.
I just wanted to add, this is Jennifer from West Virginia, that I really appreciated your presentation. And I know this is, I think the anchor points are things that we try to include, but sometimes the craziness of extension and, that we're always out and doing service with kids or with teachers, sometimes we lose sight of it. And so it's really important to come back and be intentional. And I loved your comment about, I'm a chemist by training, as well as, a public school teacher before I came to this. So without application, the learning is incomplete, and that's so true. And we try to do that as much as possible, but sometimes you just lose sight because you get so busy, and so I thought this was a great talk. I look forward to reading through the article as well.
Well, and any feedback you have on the article, or other work that we're doing, we've tried in California here to put into place some really some foundational pieces, because as you said, oftentimes we're too busy doing what we're doing to stop and smell the roses. And we found that there were just some missing components to our efforts. And So we did slow ourselves down and tried to put some foundational pieces in place. Lynn's nodding her head there.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about, so I work primarily with adults, whether that be staff or community collaborators or other faculty. But just having this common ground by which to ground your conversation is so important. You know, I recall back a few years ago where we were trying to define what positive youth development was, and everybody was all over the board, right? So how can you really move forward unless you can kind of define what you're all talking about, and then get that buy-in so that everybody can move forward in that same direction has been really important when we've been working with other faculty, staff, and program providers, such that they can understand the context by which we do science, because it's not the same as it is in a classroom, or it's not the same as you would do it in a museum. And I think once we can have those conversations, it alleviates some of that angst people have around science, and around and changing their attitudes as seeing themselves as people who can do science, which can really go a long way when you're trying to advance science literacy in your communities, is having those partners who feel confident and competent.
Yeah, this is Mike in Minnesota, and I'd be interested in learning more about that, Lynn. You bring up a good point, because we always talk about, you know, trying to let others know, our volunteers, the general public, what we bring to youth development, and that a lot of people don't even understand what youth development even is.
Right.
And then when we can't all agree on a common, you know, place to start from, or a foundation ourselves with staff, then kind of the signals we send out get mixed. You know, and then how do we raise up all the STEM things that we're doing when, you know, when our foundation is a little bit confusing.
Well, and it's not something that you ever really check off your list, right? Because people are coming and going all the time. So it's a constant, you know, it's the mantra that you have, you know, and Martin and I have our own mantras that we use all the time, but, you know, you just have to kind of keep at it. And it's the, you know, the tortoise and the hare kind of a thing. You just have to be persistent and stay with it.
So a real quick aside is oftentimes we are saying the same thing, but we're using different language. And so these common definitions of, well, what do things mean? And we do, if we're all speaking the same language, then we can begin to make comparisons and understand and move things forward collectively. Otherwise, it's pretty haphazard. And Lynn and I always, she's talking about our mantras, because we always chuckle about being systematic and intentional. But just even by using those words, we ground ourselves. And it has helped. It has helped us a lot in our work, and I think that it carries over to the professional development work that we do, and it's a long-term effort. We've been at this particular work now for, you know, I mean, 10, 12 years, just getting these foundational pieces together. But we believe we're turning a corner, and
that's not to say that there isn't more opportunity, you know, more work to be done. You know, we've often talked about, we've got this anchor points piece. We also have a curriculum piece. We have got a couple of foundational pieces that we could probably, you know, roll up into a nice big training package for people, whether it be virtual or face-to-face, and then kind of taking the research behind it and do the application, the how-to for people. So there's still more opportunity that we could address to further extend what we're trying to accomplish here. So thank you for the comment.